The autumn sun cast long shadows across the palace gardens as King Edmund stood at the tall windows of his private study. His weathered hands clasped behind his back, he watched Princess Isabella walk among the rose bushes with her two young children. The sight stirred something deep within him that he had not felt in years, a sense of hope for the future of the crown. Isabella moved with natural grace, her laughter carrying on the crisp air as she chased her youngest son around the fountain. She wore a simple blue dress, nothing grand or formal, yet she possessed a dignity that could not be taught. Her genuine warmth with the children reminded Edmund of his late mother, Queen Adelaide, who had ruled with both strength and compassion. Behind him, the study door opened quietly. Edmund did not need to turn to know it was Vivian, his wife and queen consort. Her footsteps were always careful, measured, as if she was constantly aware of her place in this ancient institution. She had been by his side for nearly 2 decades now, through scandals and celebrations. Yet lately Edmund sensed a change in her demeanor. "She's wonderful with them," Vivian said softly, joining him at the window. Her voice carried no bitterness, only a quiet observation that seemed to acknowledge something unspoken between them. Edmund nodded slowly. "Isabella understands what this family needs. She brings life to traditions that were growing stale." He paused, watching as Isabella helped her daughter pick flowers. "The people love her authenticity. She doesn't perform royalty. She simply is royal." Vivian's reflection in the window showed a woman in her 70s, still elegant but bearing the weight of years spent navigating the complex waters of royal protocol. She had married into this family when it was struggling with public perception, when scandal and tragedy had shaken the very foundations of the monarchy. Her steady presence had helped restore stability, but now she found herself watching a new generation take center stage. "The Prime Minister mentioned the upcoming state visits," Vivian said, her tone neutral. He suggested that Isabella might take the lead on the cultural exchange programs. It was a significant shift. For years, Vivian had overseen such diplomatic responsibilities, building relationships with foreign dignitaries and representing the crown at cultural events. Now gradually these duties were being passed to Isabella, who brought fresh energy and modern perspective to centuries-old traditions. Edmund finally turned from the window, studying his wife's face. Vivian had always been skilled at hiding her emotions, a necessary trait for someone in her position, but he could see the subtle signs of resignation in her eyes. She was not bitter about this transition. She understood its necessity, but there was a melancholy in accepting that her most prominent years were behind her. "You've served this family with remarkable dedication," Edmund said quietly. "Your contributions will never be forgotten." Vivian smiled, a genuine expression that softened her formal demeanor. "I married you knowing that duty would always come before personal desires. I've made peace with that long ago." She paused, glancing back toward the garden where Isabella was now sitting on a bench, reading a story to her children. "She represents everything this family needs to survive into the next century." The conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. Prince William, Edmund's eldest son and Isabella's husband, entered with a slight bow. His face showed the strain of recent weeks when rumors had circulated about the crown's future direction. As heir apparent, he felt the weight of expectation more heavily than anyone. "Father, the Archbishop has arrived for this afternoon's meeting about the coronation anniversary ceremony," William said. "He's asking about the seating arrangements and protocol changes." Edmund exchanged a meaningful glance with Vivian. The anniversary ceremony would be a public display of royal hierarchy, where every gesture and position would be analyzed by media and historians alike. Recent months had seen subtle shifts in how public appearances were arranged, with Isabella and William positioned more prominently, while Vivian gracefully took less central roles. "Tell the Archbishop we'll be there shortly," Edmund replied, "and ask Isabella to join us. Her input on modern ceremony approaches would be valuable." As William left to relay the message, Vivian gathered her composure with practiced ease. She had attended countless such meetings over the years, offering wisdom gained through experience while adapting to changing times. Now she would need to navigate this transition with the same grace she had shown through every other challenge. Outside, Isabella was walking back toward the palace with her children, unaware of the conversation taking place in the study above. Her natural maternal instincts and genuine connection with people from all walks of life had made her increasingly central to the royal family's public image. She approached her duties not as burdens but as opportunities to serve, bringing authenticity to a role that had sometimes seemed distant from ordinary people's lives. The setting sun painted the palace walls golden as 3 generations of royalty prepared to meet and discuss the future. Each carried their own understanding of duty, sacrifice, and the delicate balance between tradition and progress. The moment represented more than just ceremonial planning. It was a quiet acknowledgement that leadership was passing to new hands, guided by wisdom earned through years of service but energized by fresh vision and hope. The morning newspapers spread across the breakfast table told a story that the palace walls could no longer contain. Headlines spoke of a new era of royal leadership and the princess who captivated a nation. Isabella sat quietly reading the coverage while her coffee grew cold, seemingly unaware of the historical significance these journalists attributed to her recent public appearances. Across the dining room, Vivienne reviewed her own press clippings with the detached professionalism of someone who had learned to view media coverage as weather reports, sometimes favorable, sometimes harsh, but ultimately beyond her control. The articles about her were respectful but brief, often mentioning her graceful step back and supportive role in what they termed the monarchy's modernization. King Edmund entered the room carrying a folder of official documents, his morning briefing from the private secretary's office. The constitutional monarchy required constant attention to detail, endless meetings with government officials, and careful navigation of political sensitivities. At 75, he felt the weight of these responsibilities more acutely than ever. The Australian Prime Minister has formally requested that Isabella lead the Commonwealth delegation next spring, Edmund announced, setting down his papers. It would be her first major solo international assignment representing the Crown. Isabella looked up from her newspaper, surprise evident in her expression. Such assignments traditionally went to the most senior royals, and this invitation represented a significant vote of confidence from international leaders. "That's quite an honor," she said carefully. "Are you certain it's appropriate for me to take such a prominent role?" Vivienne set down her own reading material and smiled warmly at Isabella. "My dear, appropriateness is no longer the question. The question is whether you're ready to accept the responsibility that comes with such trust." The truth was that Isabella's approach to royal duties had already transformed public perception of the monarchy. Where previous generations had maintained careful distance from controversial topics, Isabella engaged thoughtfully with social issues affecting ordinary families. Her visits to hospitals, schools, and community centers felt genuine rather than obligatory, and her ability to connect with people across different backgrounds had restored faith in the institution's relevance. Prince William joined them, having concluded his morning meeting with military advisors about upcoming veteran ceremonies. His face showed both pride and concern as he took his place beside Isabella. The pressure of being married to someone who had become so central to the family's future weighed on him differently than traditional royal expectations. The Veterans Association specifically requested that Isabella speak at the memorial service. William said, reaching for Isabella's hand. They said her recent work with military families has given them hope that their sacrifices are truly understood. It was another example of how Isabella's natural empathy had created connections that went beyond ceremonial obligations. Her work with military families facing deployment challenges and her advocacy for veteran mental health services had earned respect from communities that had sometimes felt overlooked by traditional royal patronage. Edmund watched this exchange with growing conviction that the transition he had been contemplating was not just inevitable but necessary. The monarchy's survival depended on its ability to remain relevant to contemporary society, and Isabella embodied that relevance in ways that formal training could never achieve. Vivienne excused herself to prepare for her afternoon engagements, but not before offering Isabella a piece of advice that carried the wisdom of decades in the public eye. Remember that authenticity is your greatest strength, but it also makes you vulnerable. Never lose your genuine nature, but always be mindful of how your words and actions will be interpreted by those who may not share your good intentions. After Vivienne left, the conversation turned to practical matters of royal scheduling and protocol. Isabella's calendar had become increasingly demanding as organizations sought her patronage and government officials requested her presence at state functions. Each appearance required careful preparation, not just in terms of appropriate attire and speaking points, but in understanding the complex web of relationships and sensitivities that surrounded every royal engagement. Sometimes I wonder if I'm truly ready for all of this, Isabella confided to Edmund and William. The responsibility feels enormous, and I'm always conscious that one mistake could reflect poorly on the entire family. Edmund leaned forward, his expression serious but encouraging. That awareness is precisely why you're the right person for this role. Those who seek power without understanding its weight are dangerous. Those who understand the weight but accept it anyway are the ones history remembers as great leaders. The palace staff moved quietly around them, preparing for the day's activities with the practiced efficiency that kept the royal household functioning smoothly. Each servant understood their role in maintaining the dignity and continuity of an institution that had survived centuries of political upheaval and social change. Isabella's personal secretary arrived with updates on correspondence from the public. Letters and messages had been arriving in unprecedented numbers, many from young families expressing gratitude for Isabella's advocacy on issues affecting their daily lives. Single mothers wrote about feeling seen and supported. Teachers appreciated her focus on educational funding, and healthcare workers thanked her for highlighting their challenges during recent policy debates. This direct connection with ordinary citizens represented something new in royal tradition. While previous generations had maintained respectful distance from political matters, Isabella had found ways to advocate for social causes without crossing constitutional boundaries. Her approach was personal rather than political, focusing on human stories rather than policy positions. As the morning progressed, it became clear that this was more than just another day in royal life. The conversations, the media coverage, and the requests for Isabella's involvement all pointed toward a fundamental shift in how the monarchy would operate in the coming years. The transition was happening gradually, respectfully, but with unmistakable momentum toward a future where authenticity and genuine service would define royal leadership. The crisis arrived on a Tuesday morning, as these things often do, without warning or preparation. Isabella stood in the palace communications center, watching news reports that threatened to overshadow months of careful relationship building between the crown and the public. A foreign newspaper had published photographs from a private royal gathering, taken by a guest who had violated the trust of hospitality. The images themselves were innocent enough, family members relaxing during a summer weekend at the countryside estate. But the accompanying article speculated about tensions within the royal family, suggesting that Vivian felt displaced by Isabella's rising prominence. The story painted a picture of jealousy and competition that bore no resemblance to the reality of their relationship. Press Secretary Margaret Davies stood beside Isabella, fielding phone calls from international media outlets seeking official responses. The palace's traditional approach would have been to issue a brief statement, denying the allegations and requesting privacy. But this situation required more nuanced handling in an era of social media and instant global communication. "We need to address this directly," Isabella said, her voice steady despite the stress of seeing her family portrayed so inaccurately. "Silence will only allow these false narratives to grow." Margaret nodded, though her expression showed concern about departing from established protocol. The royal family had traditionally maintained dignity through restraint, rarely engaging directly with media speculation. However, Isabella's approach to public communication had always been more open and immediate than her predecessors. King Edmund arrived with William and Vivian, all having been briefed on the situation by their respective staff members. The communications center, normally a quiet hub of careful message coordination, now buzzed with the urgency of crisis management. Senior advisors gathered around the conference table, their faces showing the strain of protecting an institution under unexpected attack. "The photographs were taken during our charity planning weekend," Vivian said calmly, reviewing the offending article on her tablet. "The conversation they claimed to have overheard never happened. I was discussing garden renovations with the estate manager, not expressing any concerns about family dynamics. The manufactured controversy highlighted the challenges facing any prominent family living under constant scrutiny. Every gesture, conversation, and expression could be misinterpreted and transformed into sensational headlines by those seeking to profit from public curiosity about royal life." Isabella felt the weight of responsibility more acutely than ever before. Her natural instinct was to defend Vivian publicly, to set the record straight about their genuine mutual respect and friendship. However, royal protocol demanded careful consideration of how any response might be perceived or twisted into further controversy. "Perhaps we should organize a joint appearance," suggested Sir Thomas Whitmore, the king's private secretary. "Something informal that demonstrates the actual warmth of your relationship without appearing to respond directly to the accusations." It was a delicate balance between authenticity and strategy, between genuine human response and calculated public relations. Isabella had always prided herself on approaching royal duties with sincerity, rather than artifice. But this situation required navigation of complex currents that could easily overwhelm someone less experienced in public life. Vivienne reached across the table and placed her hand over Isabella's, a gesture of support that went unnoticed by the bustling staff, but meant everything to the younger woman. "These storms pass," Vivienne said quietly. "What matters is maintaining our integrity through the turbulence." The advice carried the wisdom of someone who had weathered decades of media storms, from legitimate criticism to manufactured scandals. Vivienne had learned that responding to every false story only gave them more attention and credibility. Sometimes the most powerful response was to continue serving with dignity, while letting actions speak louder than denials. Over the next several hours, the palace communications team worked to craft a response that would address the false narrative without giving it more prominence than it deserved. They decided on a statement emphasizing the family's unity and shared commitment to service, accompanied by photographs from recent joint engagements that showed the genuine collaboration between Isabella and Vivienne. Meanwhile, something unexpected began happening on social media platforms. Members of the public who had attended events where Isabella and Vivienne appeared together started sharing their own photographs and experiences. Teachers posted pictures from school visits where both women had worked seamlessly as a team. Hospital workers shared stories of how Vivienne had quietly supported Isabella during emotionally challenging patient visits. These organic testimonials from ordinary citizens carried more weight than any official statement could achieve. They showed real moments of cooperation and mutual respect, creating a counter-narrative that emerged from genuine public experience rather than palace publicity efforts. Isabella watched this grassroots response with amazement and gratitude. The support came not because people had been told what to think, but because they had witnessed firsthand the authentic relationships within the royal family. It reinforced her belief that genuine service and honest communication would ultimately triumph over manufactured controversy. By evening, the crisis had begun to resolve itself through this combination of careful official response and spontaneous public support. The foreign newspaper's story was being questioned by other media outlets who found their own sources contradicting the original claims. Social media discussions had shifted from speculation about royal tensions to appreciation for the family's actual work in communities. Vivienne found Isabella in the garden as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The stress of the day had passed, but both women felt the exhaustion that comes from defending against unfair attacks on their character and relationships. "You handled today beautifully," Vivienne said, settling beside Isabella on the garden bench where so many important conversations had taken place over the years. "Your instinct to trust the public's intelligence rather than hiding behind traditional palace walls was exactly right." Isabella looked at the woman who had become both mentor and friend, someone who had shown her how to balance personal authenticity with public responsibility. "I couldn't have managed without your guidance and support. This family is stronger because of the foundation you've helped build." The conversation continued as stars appeared in the darkening sky. Two women from different generations united by their commitment to service and their understanding that true strength comes from supporting one another, rather than competing for attention or recognition. The children's hospital had been struck by tragedy during the night, a fire in the East Wing that, while contained quickly, had shaken the entire community. When dawn broke over the city, Isabella was already in her car heading to the scene, having heard about the incident through emergency services communications that reached the palace. She arrived to find Vivienne already there, speaking quietly with hospital administrators and offering comfort to families who had been evacuated from patient rooms. Neither woman had coordinated their response. Both had simply followed their instincts to provide support during a crisis that transcended royal protocol and touched the most vulnerable members of society. The sight of smoke damage and displaced young patients stirred something profound in both women. This was not a scheduled royal visit with planned activities and prepared speeches. This was raw human need requiring immediate, genuine response from people in positions to offer help and hope. The children in the burn unit had to be moved to temporary facilities. Dr. Sarah Chen, the hospital's chief administrator, explained as she guided them through corridors that still smelled of smoke. We're managing the medical needs well enough, but the psychological impact on families who were already dealing with serious illnesses is enormous. Isabella knelt beside a wheelchair where 8-year-old Marcus sat with his mother, both looking overwhelmed by the sudden disruption to their carefully planned treatment routine. Marcus had been receiving therapy for severe burns from a house fire 6 months earlier, and the hospital fire had triggered traumatic memories for both mother and child. I know this is scary, Isabella said softly, taking the little boy's hand. But look around at all these doctors and nurses who are working so hard to take care of everyone. They're like superheroes, aren't they? Vivian watched this interaction while speaking with Marcus's mother, offering the kind of practical support that came from decades of experience in crisis situations. She had already contacted her private office to arrange temporary accommodation for families who lived too far away to return home during the facility disruption. The two women worked naturally as a team throughout the morning, with Isabella connecting emotionally with patients and families, while Vivian coordinated practical solutions with hospital administrators and local government officials. Their different strengths complemented each other perfectly, creating a comprehensive response that addressed both immediate emotional needs and longer-term practical challenges. News media had gathered outside the hospital, but both women had instructed their security teams to maintain distance that would allow them to work without disruption. This was not about public relations or photo opportunities. It was about genuine service during a moment when people needed support more than ceremony. In the temporary pediatric ward, they encountered the Jameson family, whose 6-year-old daughter Emma was undergoing leukemia treatment. The fire had interrupted Emma's chemotherapy schedule, and her parents were struggling with anxiety about treatment delays and the stress of sudden relocation. Will the medicine still work if we have to wait? Emma asked Isabella, her voice small but direct in the way children's questions often cut straight to the heart of adult fears. Isabella looked to Dr. Chen, who nodded encouragingly before answering. The doctors are very smart about timing your medicine just right. A short delay won't hurt your treatment, and they're working hard to get everything back to normal very soon. Vivian had been speaking quietly with Emma's father, who had missed work for several days to stay with his daughter. She discreetly arranged for the family to receive assistance with accommodation and meals, understanding that financial stress often accompanied medical challenges for ordinary families. As afternoon approached, the immediate crisis had stabilized into manageable disruption. Patient care was functioning effectively in temporary locations. Families had been connected with support services, and plans were already underway for renovating the damaged wing with improved safety features. The experience had created an unexpected bond between Isabella and Vivian that went beyond their usual collaborative relationship. They had worked together under pressure without any preparation or assigned roles, relying on their individual strengths while supporting each other's efforts seamlessly. You were remarkable today, Isabella told Vivian as they finally prepared to leave the hospital. The way you anticipated what families needed before they even asked, and how you coordinated resources without making anyone feel like charity cases, that takes real wisdom. Vivian smiled, but her expression showed the emotional toll of witnessing so much suffering in one place. You brought something I could never provide, she replied. Your ability to connect with those children, to make them feel seen and valued rather than just pitied. That's a gift that can't be learned or practiced. The drive back to the palace was quiet, both women processing the day's emotional intensity. They had seen families facing unimaginable challenges with courage and grace, medical professionals working beyond their normal duties to provide care during disruption, and community members volunteering their time and resources to support complete strangers. That evening, King Edmund found them in the family drawing room, both still wearing the simple, practical clothes they had chosen for hospital visits rather than formal royal attire. They were reviewing follow-up plans to ensure the families they had met would receive continued support during the hospital's recovery period. The press is calling it an extraordinary display of royal compassion, Edmund said, settling into his favorite armchair. But I suspect you were both too busy to notice the cameras. Isabella and Vivian exchanged glances that conveyed their shared understanding that the media coverage, while positive, had been entirely secondary to their focus on the people who needed help. They had responded to crisis as human beings first and public figures second, allowing their genuine concern to guide their actions without concern for public perception. We'll need to establish a relief fund for the hospital renovation, Vivian said, already thinking ahead to practical next steps, and perhaps coordinate with other children's hospitals to share resources during the rebuilding period. Already in progress, Isabella replied, showing notes she had made during conversations with hospital administrators. Dr. Chen gave me contact information for facilities that might be able to help with specialized equipment loans. The day had reinforced something both women already knew but had, perhaps not fully articulated. Their different approaches to royal service were not competing visions but complementary, strengths that together created more comprehensive support for people facing challenges than either could provide alone. The state banquet had been planned for months, welcoming the president of the Nordic Federation and celebrating decades of diplomatic cooperation between their nations. Every detail had been carefully orchestrated, from the seating arrangements that honored protocol to the menu that celebrated both cultures' culinary traditions. Yet as the evening unfolded, it became clear that this would be remembered for moments that no amount of planning could have anticipated. Isabella stood in the blue drawing room, making final adjustments to her formal gown while reviewing her briefing notes for conversations with visiting dignitaries. The responsibility of representing her country at such events still felt weighty, but she had learned to channel nervous energy into focused preparation and genuine curiosity about the people she would meet. Vivian entered quietly, wearing an elegant midnight blue dress that complemented her silver hair beautifully. Her jewelry was understated but magnificent, pieces that had been worn by queens for generations and carried the weight of history in their diamonds and sapphires. "You look absolutely radiant," Vivian said, adjusting a small detail on Isabella's necklace with the practiced eye of someone who understood that every element of royal appearance would be scrutinized and remembered. "President Larson specifically requested to speak with you about your youth mental health initiatives." The comment revealed something significant that had been developing over recent months. International leaders increasingly sought meetings with Isabella, recognizing her influence on social policy and her ability to connect with younger generations across different cultures. Her reputation for substantive conversations rather than mere ceremonial pleasantries had spread through diplomatic circles. King Edmund appeared in the doorway, resplendent in his formal military dress uniform with medals that told the story of a lifetime of service. His expression showed both pride and something deeper, a recognition that this evening represented more than just another state function. The president's advance team mentioned that several Nordic youth organizations have specifically asked about Isabella's work, Edmund said, reviewing his own briefing materials. "It seems her influence extends far beyond our borders." The three walked together toward the state dining room, where over 150 guests would gather for an evening that blended centuries-old traditions with contemporary diplomatic objectives. The palace staff had outdone themselves with floral arrangements that incorporated flowers from both countries' national emblems, creating a visual representation of the friendship being celebrated. As they entered the grand dining room, Isabella noticed how naturally the seating arrangement had evolved to place her in increasingly prominent positions at such events. She was seated between the visiting president and the foreign secretary, positioning her as a key participant in diplomatic conversations rather than merely decorative royalty. President Larson, a woman in her 60s who had led her country through significant economic and social reforms, immediately engaged Isabella in substantive discussion about youth policy initiatives that transcended national boundaries. Their conversation drew the attention of other guests, who recognized the significance of seeing two influential women from different generations sharing ideas about addressing global challenges. "Your approach to mental health advocacy has inspired similar programs in our universities," President Larson told Isabella during the fish course. Young people are facing unprecedented pressures, and your ability to discuss these issues without stigma or political rhetoric has been remarkable. Isabella felt the weight of such recognition, understanding that her words and actions had consequences far beyond her own country's borders. The responsibility was both humbling and motivating, reinforcing her commitment to using her platform for meaningful social impact. Meanwhile, Vivian was engaged in her own significant conversations with diplomatic spouses and cultural representatives, drawing on her deep knowledge of international relations and her years of experience building personal connections that strengthened formal alliances. Her contributions to the evening were less visible, but equally important in maintaining the web of relationships that supported peaceful cooperation between nations. During the main course, something unexpected happened that would be remembered long after the evening ended. A young server, clearly nervous about working such a prestigious event, accidentally spilled wine near President Larson's place setting. The incident could have created diplomatic awkwardness or personal embarrassment for the staff member. Instead, Isabella immediately engaged the server in quiet conversation, asking about her studies while discreetly helping to manage the cleanup. President Larson followed Isabella's lead, mentioning her own experiences with service work during her youth. What could have been a moment of tension became an opportunity for authentic human connection that embodied the values both countries sought to promote. Vivian observed this interaction with profound appreciation for Isabella's instinctive grace under pressure. Such moments revealed character more clearly than any prepared speech or formal ceremony, demonstrating the kind of leadership that could navigate an increasingly complex world with both dignity and genuine compassion. As the evening progressed through toasts and formal remarks, it became evident that the dynamics of royal representation were shifting in real time. President Larson's closing remarks specifically thanked Isabella for representing the future of thoughtful leadership while acknowledging Vivian's role in establishing the foundation for such excellence. The words were diplomatic but carried deeper meaning for those who understood the careful transitions taking place within the royal family. International leaders were recognizing and responding to changes in how the monarchy was evolving to meet contemporary challenges while maintaining its essential role in national identity and international relationships. After the guests had departed, and the palace had returned to its nighttime quiet, the three family members gathered in Edmund's private study. The formal attire had been replaced with comfortable clothes, but the significance of the evening's developments hung in the air like incense from the cathedral services that marked important state occasions. Tonight felt different, Isabella said, settling into a leather chair that had hosted countless royal conversations over the decades. Not just ceremonially different, but substantively different in how people responded to our family's role. Edmund nodded thoughtfully, pouring brandy from a crystal decanter that had belonged to his grandfather. Change happens gradually, then suddenly. Tonight felt like one of those suddenly moments when everyone recognizes what has been building for months. Vivian accepted her glass, with a small smile that conveyed both satisfaction and a touch of melancholy. She had worked for years to help the monarchy navigate toward this kind of respected relevance, and seeing that goal achieved brought complex emotions about her own evolving role in the family's future. Spring had arrived early that year, filling the palace gardens with daffodils and cherry blossoms that seemed to mirror the sense of renewal surrounding the royal family. Isabella walked slowly along the gravel paths, her pace deliberate as she approached the garden pavilion where Vivian spent many quiet mornings reading correspondence and planning her increasingly selective public engagements. The conversation they were about to have had been building for weeks, perhaps months, though neither had explicitly acknowledged its necessity until now. Recent announcements from the palace had gradually shifted responsibilities and public roles, creating space for what everyone understood to be a natural evolution in how the monarchy would function moving forward. Vivian looked up from her reading as Isabella approached, gesturing to the chair beside her with the warm smile that had become natural between them over years of shared experiences. The morning sun filtered through leaves just beginning to show their spring green, creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed appropriate for a conversation about transitions and new beginnings. "I've been hoping we could talk privately," Isabella said, settling beside the woman who had become her most trusted advisor and dearest friend within the complex world of royal life. About the changes that everyone can see happening, but that we haven't really discussed directly. Vivian set down her letters, giving Isabella her complete attention with the same focused presence she had brought to every important moment throughout her years of service. "I've been wondering when you would feel ready for this conversation," she replied gently. "Change is happening whether we discuss it or not, but talking about it allows us to shape how it unfolds." The truth was that Vivian had been gradually stepping back from her most prominent roles for several months, making space for Isabella to take on increased responsibilities that better reflected the public's expectations and the monarchy's needs. The transition had been so graceful that it appeared natural rather than orchestrated, but both women understood the careful thought that had guided each decision. "I don't want you to feel pushed aside or forgotten," Isabella said, her voice carrying the emotional weight of someone who genuinely cared about the person who had helped guide her through the complexities of royal life. "Your wisdom and experience have shaped everything I've learned about serving with dignity and purpose." Vivian reached over and took Isabella's hand, a gesture that conveyed affection and reassurance. "My dear, I'm not being pushed aside. I'm choosing to step back because I can see that the future requires leadership I can support but cannot provide. You represent something this institution needs to remain relevant and meaningful." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, covering practical matters about upcoming responsibilities and ceremonial roles, but focusing primarily on the emotional aspects of this transition. Both women acknowledged the bittersweet nature of change, even when it serves a greater purpose and happens with mutual respect and understanding. "I want to continue contributing," Vivian said, "but in ways that support your leadership rather than competing with it or confusing the public about who speaks for the family's values." Isabella felt tears gathering as she fully understood the sacrifice Vivian was making, not just of prominence or public attention, but of the central role that had defined her identity for decades. "You'll always be essential to this family and to me personally. I hope you know that stepping back from some duties doesn't diminish what you've accomplished or what you mean to all of us." The sound of approaching footsteps announced King Edmund's arrival, though his expression suggested he had been watching from a distance and choosing the right moment to join them. He carried a leather portfolio that contained documents requiring attention, but his focus was clearly on the conversation taking place in the peaceful garden setting. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Edmund said, taking a seat across from the two women, who had become the heart of his family's public service. "But I wanted to share some news that affects both of you." He opened the portfolio and withdrew a formal letter bearing the seal of the Commonwealth Secretariat. "The heads of government have unanimously requested that Isabella serve as the primary royal representative for next year's Commonwealth Conference. It's the first time they've designated someone other than the monarch for this role. The significance of this appointment was enormous, representing not just increased responsibility for Isabella, but formal recognition from international leaders that she had become the voice of contemporary royal leadership. It was exactly the kind of transition that had been developing gradually, but was now being acknowledged officially. Vivian's face showed pure pride and satisfaction rather than any hint of regret or jealousy. "This is exactly what the monarchy needs," she said firmly. "Isabella has earned this recognition through her genuine service and authentic connection with people from all walks of life." Edmund looked at both women with the expression of a man who had successfully guided his family through a complex transition that could have created conflict but had instead strengthened their bonds and their effectiveness. "What makes this particularly meaningful is that the request came specifically because of how well you work together. They cited the partnership you've demonstrated as evidence of the royal family's unity and shared commitment to service." As afternoon approached, the three walked back toward the palace together, their conversation having resolved questions that had been building for months while opening possibilities for the future that served both personal relationships and institutional needs. The transition that had seemed so daunting when viewed from a distance had proven manageable when approached with honesty, mutual respect, and shared commitment to serving something larger than individual ambitions. That evening, as Isabella tucked her children into bed, she reflected on the day's conversations and their implications for her family's future. The increased responsibilities felt less overwhelming, knowing that she would continue to have Vivian's wisdom and support, even as their public roles evolved to reflect changing times and expectations. In her own quarters, Vivian reviewed plans for upcoming engagements that would allow her to contribute meaningfully while supporting Isabella's leadership. She felt a sense of completion rather than loss, understanding that successful transitions require knowing when to step forward and when to step back with equal grace and timing. King Edmund stood once again at his study windows, looking out over gardens where 3 generations had walked and talked through challenges that tested both personal relationships and institutional stability. The sight of Isabella and Vivian's easy friendship had convinced him that the monarchy would not only survive but thrive under leadership that valued both tradition and adaptation, both service and authenticity. The future stretched ahead with its inevitable challenges and opportunities, but this family had proven their ability to navigate change while maintaining the values that made their service meaningful to people seeking hope, stability, and examples of dignity in an increasingly complex world.